On Saturday, August 9th, 2025, we have this month's full moon happening in the sign of Aquarius. And this full moon is all about individuality, authenticity, and liberation, and breaking free from those things that no longer align. So if you've recently found yourself kind of like stuck repeating old patterns, or you're just kind of ready to try something new or try something that you've never done before, this is the full moon to really liberate yourself and release those things that are no longer aligned. So if you want to know how this full moon and all the other astrology transits going on in the sky right now are going to be influencing you and impacting you, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below so you don't miss out on, what's going on in the sky. Also, if you're new here, hi, I'm Mackenzie, aka Astromac, and I'm a professional astrologer, and I talk all things astrology on this channel. And I also offer a bunch of different astrology readings, so if you're interested in that, be sure to click the link down below and check those out. Now let's pull up the chart for this full moon and dive right in. So like I said earlier, this full moon is happening on August 9th, 2025, and it's exact at 2:55 a.m. Central Time, and it's at 16 degrees and 59 minutes of Aquarius. So let's start with a quick reminder about what full moons are. So full moons are always a time of things being illuminated and revealed, and it's also a time of culmination and things coming to fruition, like past manifestations coming to fruition, and it's always a very powerful time of release. So because this full moon is happening in the sign of Aquarius, it might be beneficial to reflect back on the new moon in Aquarius that happened on, I believe it was January 29th of 2025, and reflecting back on the manifestations that you were setting and the intentions that you were setting during that time, because they probably are coming to fruition during this full moon. Full moons also illuminate, like I said, and so they might illuminate some things that have been hidden, or some things that are ready to shift or change or transform, or again, illuminate things that may need to be released. And full moons are always like a peak moment in the lunar cycle. And so it's a time where emotions run high, and, energy is heightened, and intuition feels stronger, and, our insights just feel like more powerful. And so with this full moon happening in the sign of Aquarius, Aquarius is that sign of like the inventor and the innovator and the rebel and the visionary. And it's a very like cerebral and abstract thinking sign. It's the sign of the humanitarian and of the future. And it's also a sign that's associated with community and networks and inspiration as well. And it's the sign that is all about, getting creative and innovating. And so that's why it's associated with like this unconventional, like future wisdom. So with the moon in an air sign, there is this energy of like emotional detachment, especially because it's in Aquarius. When you hear like emotionally detached, I feel like there's like almost like a negative connotation, but I think that this detachment could actually serve us pretty well, because as we can see here, there's a lot of intense transits that are happening at the same time of this full moon. And Aquarius is the water bearer in the zodiac, and so a water bearer is that person that's carrying this container of water, and that water represents our emotions. And so, that's that emotional detachment, like being able to contain our emotions. So this is giving us some space from our emotions to be able to kind of, reflect more and be more intentional about what our next steps are without getting like, absorbed into our feelings and our emotions. Because when the full moon lands in the sign of Aquarius, this is kind of like that full moon where we're being asked to zoom out a little bit and get some perspective and see the bigger picture and kind of detach from drama. So I'm not really seeing this as being a full moon where we're going to be like, purging our emotions and feeling all the feels. Again, there's just like a detachment from our emotions with this full moon, where we're going to be like thinking about things logistically, or we're going to be more internal and reflective and looking at things through this like Aquarius lens, this very cerebral mental lens, and, just looking at things like, what doesn't serve me anymore and what hasn't served me in a long time. And then just like letting go of those things and releasing those things. And it's not like there necessarily has to be like a big emotional release when we're releasing these things. It definitely can be, especially if it's like, hitting a very personal part of your own chart. But just being like very like matter of fact with yourself and being honest with yourself about, what hasn't served you in a while and, what are you ready to let go of so you're able to kind of, reach into the future and grab onto what's next. Like, grabbing onto something that helps you move in a direction that you want to go into the future. So this full moon is reminding us that we don't have to do things the way that we've always done them. And in fact, we're being asked to get creative and innovate and actually do things differently. And in that process, it's like liberating us. And so kind of, again, we're zooming out and seeing things from this zoomed out perspective. And when we're zoomed out like that, we are able to see things that we may have overlooked. And it's like we might even just see a new pathway that like we haven't seen before. And this pathway might lead us to a future that, we've always dreamed of and that we've always kind of been inspired by, but we didn't know how to quite get there. And so under this full moon, it might be illuminating that pathway. But on our, trek down that new path, some things need to be left in the past, those things that just logistically don't serve us anymore. And keep in mind that Aquarius is the sign that, really urges us to be ourselves. And we're in the midst of Leo season, so we're being urged to express ourselves authentically. And so, this full moon really invites us to liberate our authentic self and be ourselves. And so if you need permission to be yourself, this is the full moon. As with every full moon, this moon is opposing the sun that is currently in the sign of Leo. That's what a full moon is when sun and moon are sitting directly opposite each other and the sun is able to fully illuminate the moon. But with this full moon, it's kind of like we're needing to balance this polarity between Leo and Aquarius. Leo being that sign of self-expression and Aquarius the sign of inspiration, and also Leo being the sign of like authenticity and Aquarius the sign of community, like using our gifts and our talents and figuring out where those fit within humanity and society. Leo is the sign that wants to shine brightly and be recognized, and Aquarius is the sign that wants to uplift the collective. Leo is this sign that's all about self-expression and expressing authentically from this heart space. And it's where, we find our passions and those things that we deeply care about and those things that just like light us up from the inside out. And it's those things that just like, spark, our inner spark really. Those things that excite us and make us want to keep living and keep going, really. So really reflect on those things and think about those things that really just ignite that spark within you. And, you could even pause the video right now and just take some time to reflect on those things that you're just deeply passionate about. And really try to keep those in mind under this full moon, because things feel kind of dark right now in the world. And, I was even just telling my therapist the other day about how I feel like I've lost my spark a little bit. And so it made me have to kind of pause and just be honest with myself and really reflect on those things that I'm passionate about. And, why am I passionate about those things? And, what are those things that I deeply care about? So definitely, pause and take some time to reflect on those things that you're passionate about and those things that excite you and those things that just light you up and, those things that you can bring to the collective. Because again, this Leo Aquarius axis is taking that authentic self-expression of Leo and figuring out where that fits within the whole, and, taking those passions and figuring out, where that fits within a group context. And it's about how you take your own unique energy and frequency and expression out into the world at large and, allowing yourself to be seen and heard within a group and within society. Really tuning into your authentic and unique and original self-expression and frequency and expressing that. Like, this is who I am and this is what I'm about, and really taking that risk and, putting yourself out there and allowing yourself to be seen for who you are authentically. And, there's always an element of risk when you're putting yourself out there, especially in an authentic way, because, we risk rejection when we put ourselves out there authentically, but it's a matter of finding that acceptance from within yourself and accepting yourself so deeply that no opinions and no other feelings of rejection sways who you are. Because the more that you put yourself out there authentically, it's like the right people will find you, and the people who are aligned with you and your vision will be able to find you. But you have to be willing to take that risk and put yourself out there. And the more that you put yourself out there, again, those people will find you who are aligned with you, and you will find your community as well. And so just, being willing to take that risk to express your authenticity and to create and innovate and make something new and different that kind of, progresses humanity and progresses your own path forward. And when you think about it, it is kind of like the weirdos in the world who really progress humanity and move humanity forward. And, weirdos in the way of just genuine authenticity and, people who are a little bit different, who aren't afraid to just be themselves. These are the people who don't try to be anybody but themselves, and they don't try to blend into the crowd. They're just being themselves, and that in and of itself is super inspiring, honestly. So don't be afraid to fly your freak flag under this full moon, or, be a little bit weird, and don't be afraid to be a little bit weird. But, just be yourself, honestly. Let this be your permission to, move forward being yourself and doing so in a very authentic way. And so depending on where this full moon is happening for you in your own chart, this could be a very a culmination moment, or, a time where past manifestations are coming to fruition, or your past efforts for creative projects, or it could be your work within a community is coming to a culmination point. You're finally being recognized for it, or it could be that you finally get that creative inspiration that you've been craving. And this inspiration really ignites that spark that you've been needing, or whatever it might be. There's just this very liberating energy with this full moon. And, with liberation comes an element of risk, because, liberation is kind of it's we're breaking free of something, and breaking free of limitations or restraints. And sometimes with those restrictions, we become comfortable in those restrictions. So under this full moon, just not being afraid to liberate yourself and be free of some of those restrictions. And when I say take a risk, I'm not saying take these huge, big, dangerous risks that could risk your life or anything. Don't do that. But what I'm saying, for example, if you're in a community and you're generally more of a quiet person who sits back to observe, maybe you start speaking up more and sharing your voice more and sharing your ideas, or sharing your creations more openly. Or you stop, shrinking yourself in group environments, and you stop dimming your light. And again, with that comes an element of risk, because, when we express ourselves authentically, again, we risk rejection. And so it's kind of, under this full moon, actually, it might be beneficial to release that feeling of, that fear of rejection. And then as you release that fear of rejection, replacing it with this true, complete self-acceptance. And so under this full moon, really ask yourself, where are you craving more freedom? Or, where are you being called to think differently, or think outside of the box, or, express your ideas more openly, even if it disrupts the status quo? And really reflecting on, what version of yourself no longer fits who you want to become, and no longer fits that vision of yourself that you see in the future. Now, finally, moving on to the chart, this full moon isn't making any aspects that are super concerning, but because it is happening in Aquarius, that means that it's ruled by Uranus, that is newly in Gemini, and it's also co-ruled by Saturn, that is still conjunct Neptune in Aries. And as we can see here, Mars, newly in Libra, is opposing that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries, and it's also a part of a big aspect pattern known as a kite formation. This tells me it might be kind of an uncomfortable full moon, where it's kind of we have this desire to take action, but it's Saturn is pushing the brakes, and Neptune is bringing this element of confusion. And so even though we are feeling more inspired and this new pathway might be illuminated, it brings this feeling of we're pushing the gas and the brakes at the same time with this aspect. And so it brings this feeling of, wanting to make a change and wanting to release these things, but it's like Saturn is saying like, slow down, like, let's pause and reflect and not make any impulsive decisions. Also, we also have Mercury still retrograde. So that's like another thing. It might feel like we don't have all the puzzle pieces in order to make like a super informed decision. And not only is Mercury retrograde, but it's also opposing Pluto. So there brings this element of like intensity and almost like an obsessive quality. Already, like when Mercury is retrograde, it's really easy to get like zoomed in on the little things and, take things personally and react accordingly, especially because it's in Leo. So it's like if our pride is hurt, we might want to like cut relationships off or, say something impulsive that we might regret later. Like pride is a very big thing with Leo, and so if our pride is hurt or like we feel like our ego is being attacked, we might feel this urge to react emotionally. And so try not to react emotionally under this full moon, but rather, sit back and observe that desire to react and try to, weigh your options and then respond rather than react. Because with the Leo season of it all, it's kind of like things just feel bigger and more dramatic, and so things might get even more blown out of proportion. So really try to lean into and utilize this Aquarius energy and zoom out and see the bigger picture, Don't lose your vision for the future. And I think that quote is like, don't lose the forest for the trees. So really try to pay attention and notice if you find yourself kind of like overanalyzing something that somebody said, or you find yourself like almost stuck in the past and just like replaying old situations, or if you find yourself leaning into like nihilism, really try to pay attention to your thoughts under this full moon. And keep reminding yourself to come back to the present moment, and even getting outside and grounding yourself might help, but also just reminding yourself to zoom out and breathe and see the bigger picture and see things from like that eagle's eye perspective, because there is this like underlying frustrating energy under this full moon. Because again, not only are we in the middle of Mercury retrograde, which is frustrating and annoying on its own, but again, it's opposing Pluto, which brings this like obsessive quality where we might be replaying old situations or conversations in our head, or like obsessing about the little things that, really don't matter in the grand scheme of things. And again, we have Mars opposing the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is kind of like we're pushing the gas and the brakes at the same time. Then as we can see here, Mars is also forming a grand air trine to Uranus in Gemini and Pluto in Aquarius. And again, Saturn and Neptune are also at like the pinnacle of this kite formation. So this is a lot of big energy. It's a very like dynamic and complex and potent blend of energy. And the way that I was kind of looking at it, it kind of looks like, like a bow and arrow where we're like getting ready to catapult ourselves into the future. And so I was picking up on like there's a lot of very inspired and innovative energy under this full moon, but we also have this drive to kind of, act on those inspirations and reform these outdated systems and structures. Really challenging these traditions and conventions and, really challenging how things have been done in the past and, being able to move into the future with a new vision in mind. So like collectively, I really do think that this is going to be a huge time of, reforming these social systems and technology and, social media and other forms of communication. And I do think that this is going to be a very interesting day in the news. I'm not even going to try and guess what might happen. That's not exactly my area of expertise yet. But, with Uranus's involvement, it's kind of like expect the unexpected. But with this Mars, Uranus, Pluto trine, I really do think that it allows for this like inspired action to be able to take place and, for these intuitive and powerful ideas to arise and be acted upon. Then the Saturn, Neptune opposite that Mars really kind of like brings it all back down to earth, really asking us like, how do we make it real? And, what is the higher purpose in all of this? And so on a more personal level, I do think that this full moon could stir up some potential frustrations, kind of like leading to this almost like analysis paralysis. Or we might feel like, our vision for the future is like too big and too hard to, even take action on. So why even bother? But I really challenge you to not lean into the doom and gloom of it all. And, don't lean into that nihilism, but rather lean into the power of community and really lean into those things that you're passionate about and those things that really inspire you. Don't give your power away freely, but call your power back to you. And also recognize that true power comes from within. So really try to empower yourself like deeply and authentically and wholly, and really just like, know who the fuck you are and stand strong in that. And lean deep into your passions and let yourself be so inspired by those that they kind of like move you forward into a better future, really paving that pathway to the future. So yeah, that is the message that I was picking up on for this full moon. So be sure to like and subscribe if you liked what I had to say. Also, as a reminder, I do offer a bunch of different readings, including birth chart readings, transit readings, solar return readings, mini readings, and also return client readings. So if you're interested in that, be sure to check those out at the link down below. I also have a Patreon where I write weekly astrology forecasts, and so also a huge shout out to my patrons, because it's because of them that I'm able to make these videos and write the astrology forecasts and really just like keep pursuing my dream of being an astrologer. And yeah, I think that's all I've got for now. So thank you for watching and happy full moon, and until next time, love you, bye!